Hi, this is Annalisa Ventola, and I'm presenting a research brief describing the start of a multi-center collaboration using consciousness-based interventions or applying psi to climate action. The story starts with a conversation with a retired scientist who holds a firm belief that to solve the ecological crisis, our only real hope is using the underlying capabilities of psi to transmute some of the atmosphere's CO2 and methane to something less lethal. This individual was aware of a symposium that the PA held on ecology, nature, and parapsychology. But the suggestion was that perhaps parapsychologists could be asked to redirect some portion of their efforts from the theoretical to the applied. So in favor of that, I decided to host a table at a June 2021 Agora, which is a networking meeting of the Parapsychological Association that is held on the 5th of each month. And during that table conversation, the points that we agreed on is that climate change is a broad problem, that solutions will be as varied as the problem, that the responses of psi researchers will be unique, and then we agreed that we would discuss it more at the upcoming SSEPA convention that year, and that took place the next month in July, and I hosted a pop-up meeting there. Some of the Psi Agora attendees, plus a few more people showed up. We had a great conversation and we decided to start a Slack group to organize. And the members that joined us requested that Public Parapsychology host further conversations, and that we did. So over the holiday break, we hosted a volunteer-run effort that was open to the public called Exploring Consciousness-Based Applications for Climate Action. And it was comprised of a workshop, an ideathon, and a collaborative sprint. And out of that effort came 3 different research initiatives. And true to what we expected, those initiatives are all very wildly different. And so we're just going to be describing one of those today. And that particular one is modeled after the challenge for the X Prize carbon removal. That is a 4-year global competition to create and demonstrate solutions that can pull carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere or oceans and sequester it durably and sustainably. Any carbon negative solution is eligible. And we know from past experience that the X Prize Foundation is favorable to psi. So our objective is to develop an exploratory but testable prototype that uses online consciousness-based interventions to remove carbon dioxide from an air-based chamber and move it to a second chamber. Within a parapsychological framework, this approach would ask that participants consciously apport a molecule from one container to another. Now, to discuss the previous literature on apports, we're going to have Ramses take over.
Hello, everyone, and thanks, Annalisa, for the introduction. So the term apport is used to describe the paranormal appearance or transference of objects to other locations. Presumable instances of this phenomenon has been documented mainly in physical mediumship cases during the spiritualism apogee between 1850 and 1920. Mediums like Frank Klosky, Indrida-san, Esape Palladino, Daniel Home, the Fox sisters were reported to manifest apports during their senses. It has been assumed that apports exist elsewhere in this reality or timeline or another, and that they are teleported to the new location, or that they just appear close to the medium or the person who is apporting those. Apports have been scarce in the last century. Nevertheless, it have happened in the presence of some cedar groups like the Felix Experimental Group and the Society for Research on Rapport and Telekinesis, the SORAT group. Individuals not related to mediumship like Amir Miden in Brazil, in the beginning of his career, the Golden Lady, Andrew Geller in the United States, and Zhang Beshong in China, have also been studied regarding their apparent abilities to transfer objects through spatial barriers without known physical mechanisms. Something interesting is that at first glance, the best documented apports could be classified as valuable. And by that, I mean perceptually attractive, but monetarily relevant in the end. Cracked gems, impure jewelry, golden light, brass foil, inexpensive coins, nothing to make one rich, even if free. But there may be a more subtle component in the apport mechanism. There are psychological symbolisms related to each case, like the brass foil being a type of fool's gold that might satisfy the husband of the Golden Lady's desire to obtain something of value from her emergent psychic skills. In the apport case we are studying here in Mexico, HM had a severe life crisis and economical crisis just before the onset of the phenomena, wishing for money to fall from the sky. And we cannot discard the relevance of Sai Baba's religious views embedded in his upwards. Maybe the need for something valuable is relevant to the phenomenon, and maybe we might need a sample that finds value in fighting climate change for this protocol to succeed. In any case, let's move on from the analysis of the past and more into the methods of the future. And with that, I'll leave the floor to Marco Cosi so he can share with us the actual experiment.
Hi, I'm Mark Pacuzzi. I'm from the Wimbridge Institute, and I'm the developer for this project. And I'm going to walk you through the actual experiment. So as stated earlier, the objective is to develop an exploratory but testable prototype that uses online consciousness-based interventions to remove carbon dioxide from an air-based chamber and move it into a second chamber. Pretty straightforward. There's two pieces to this experiment. There's the laboratory-based sensors and chambers, and then there's the online component where we work with our research participants. I'll talk about both of these today. So the laboratory equipment for this experiment is all housed at the Wimbridge Institute, which is based in Tucson, Arizona. And so we start with our first airtight chamber, which we call the source, which contains air and CO2 molecules. We have a second airtight chamber we call the receiver. And we'll work with our group of online research participants. Their task will be to focus their psi on molecules in the source chamber and move it to the receiver. When this happens, we theorize that the level of CO2 should drop in the source chamber and should increase in the receiver chamber. There's also a third chamber which we are using as a control, and which we suspect or hope that the CO2 levels don't change throughout the course of the experiment. So how are we achieving all this? Well, the first thing we did was create a sensor package, and that sensor package allows us to measure CO2, temperature, humidity, and air pressure. And we place these sensors in each one of the chambers. We then placed all the chambers into a larger enclosure, which is light, tight, and temperature stable. And to that, we added another sensor package group and some additional sensors, a 3-axis accelerometer, so we could see if the enclosure had been jostled at all or changed, and a light sensor to see if the enclosure had been opened at all during the experiment. So data from all of these sensors are then brought outside the chamber and stored on a dedicated computer. So we end up with time-stamped CO2, temperature, humidity, air pressure, plus light and motion data. And so that's what's going on in the lab. Let's take a look at the online piece. So for the online experiment, we've created a landing page or a portal page where all of our participants will come and be shepherded through the experiment. And the site is completely mobile, friendly, and responsive. There are 3 sections. The first is a short piece about the experimenters and more detail about the background of the experiment. There's a section also for information about how people can continue to take part in climate action outside of the lab. And then there's the actual experiment, and this is where I'm going to spend the rest of my time. Okay, so as I said, all of our research participants will be online, and when they arrive at our website and choose to participate in the experiment, they'll go through an onboarding pre-screen and consent process. We'll then give them some training about the task we'd like them to complete, and then they'll have the opportunity to do the task. Then when they're complete, we'll collect some demographics, some psychometrics, and maybe a few other open-ended questions about their experience. And then they'll be brought to a happy exit experience. And it's during this PK task piece is when we'll ask them to try to change the levels of CO2 in the chambers in the lab. So what does this PK task look like? Well, we're currently prototyping and experimenting with 3 potential tasks. The first is a very open-ended meditation where we just provide instructions about the goal and we create a quiet space for the participant to complete that goal however they wish. The second is a more guided meditation where there's audio and visual cues that guide the participant through the process. And the third is an interactive game where participants will try to remove CO2, simulated CO2 molecules, or from one chamber to another, and they'll receive encouraging feedback along the way. Now, participants can either pick which activity they would like to try, or if they're unsure, the system currently will randomly pick one for them. But regardless of which activity they use, we'll know what that is, and we'll also have timing and tracking data, which we can then compare to what's going on in the lab. All right, so that is an overview of the experimental setup, both for the online piece and for the laboratory piece. And there's a lot of other details in here, but we'll save those for later. Thank you for your attention.